Hello, river pissers and blanket friends. I'm Joey.
I'm Matt.
I'm Kristen.
And welcome to Messing with the Master, a podcast where three lifelong Tori Amos fans reflect on the iconic singer-songwriter's catalog by thoughtfully and intentionally reorganizing each album into fresh playlists that explore Tori's musical legacy as well as our own interconnected personal narratives and friendship, which began with a shared passion for Tori's music over 20 years ago. This week, we are tackling Under the Pink, Tori's sophomore album, and perhaps the one most widely regarded as central to helping to shape the 90s alternative rock scene and sound, with classics such as Cornflake Girl and God making waves on radio and MTV. So come along, little darlings, come along with us. This is Messing with the Master, Under the Pink.
Hey, boys.
Hi.
Good morning.
What's up? How is Oh, good morning. It is the morning, our first morning time show.
It's very early morning for some, closer to afternoon for others, but we are
I'm right in the middle.
Yeah, but we're ready for this, I think. Whew, what a challenge.
If we're not ready to talk about Under the Pink, then we're bad fans, and we've had a lot of time to spend with this album in our lives.
But I always listen to it straight through. Matt, you know, I'm very weird about a playlist generally, but I always listen to this straight through. So this was quite an exercise.
I think I've said this to you both in private chat, and this is an album, oddly enough, that I don't necessarily feel the strongest connection to out of all of them. However, it is the album that really started my fandom over Tori Amos' music.
Same here.
This is the first album that it really just like clicked with me. So I have a complicated past with this album, but it's not the one that I listen to frequently. And I would say it's the album that I listen to the least out of all of the albums, which I know is a crazy thing to say.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember when yes. Do y'all remember, of course, when it was just Little Earthquakes, Under the Pink, and Boys for Pele? And I feel like you had like a personality type depending on the one you chose or was your go-to.
Yes.
What were each of your go-tos?
Oh. Wow. I would say this album.
It was okay.
Yeah, So for me, Little Earthquakes came later. I really liked it. There was something about the style of music on Under the Pink that spoke to me more than Little Earthquakes. And at the time, we'll get into Boys for Pele at some point. Boys for Pele, to me, at that age, at the time in 1996, it felt inaccessible. I wasn't seasoned or mature enough to really understand the full scope of Boys for Pele, which made listening to it not as enjoyable. There were more moments of enjoyment on Under the Pink for sure for me.
Joey, what about you?
Yeah, so I also had the experience of Under the Pink being, I know we'll get into our sort of real first encounters with it a little more detailed, but it was my first exposure to Tori, and so some of those songs hold like really like cellular level, the way like you smell something and it sends you back in time and you feel like you're having a literal flashback. There are moments on this album that do that to me, that bring me back to being 12 years old, 13 years old. And so I identify with it really strongly. But I would definitely say, if we were talking about that sort of, personality quiz, which Tori Amos album are you in the Holy Trinity? I think that I was very much Boys for Pele because I was a little bit older. I was 14, 15 when it came out. And I was sort of in that mode where I think that exists for teens still, just in different ways. But I was really into my like anything that makes you feel weird or tells everybody
Right.
that you're a little strange or quirky. And because Boys for Pele, even, I mean, just the cover is so, it's like, stay the fuck away, I have a shotgun. You know what I mean? Like everything about it is so abrasive. The sound, the visuals, I mean, beautiful, but also dark and strange, dirty mattresses, cows, you know, snakes, you know, it's wild. And so I felt like I was connecting. I was also connecting with older girls I had crushes on who were into Tori, who loved Boys for Pele and were just so into like the weirdness of it, which is, you know, funny to say now, but that's also formative in a gay boy's life to have women that, you know, that you're connecting to with musically. But I will say that secretly I always knew that Under the Pink was the one that felt most like a moment in time, most like stepping onto like the stage of some like surrealist play or something. And start to finish, it remains maybe the only one that I listened to from beginning to end 20 something years later. So I actually do listen to it start to finish. What were you going to say, Matt? Something snarky.
I was going to say something snarky. So Under the Pink is basically the album that taught you were a homosexual.
Yeah. I mean, Tori's
Tori's
the one who told me that I was a homosexual. No. Or gave
Look what you did, Tori.
No, nobody
Grooming.
made me gay. God made me gay. He came through.
That's right.
And he gave me
Born this
gay.
way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But no, but I will say this, you know, do you remember there was a quote by Tori when was it a quote by Tori or did somebody interviewing her say it? But there was something about Choir Girl. I think I'm conflating two quotes, but when Choir Girl came out, she and I think the interviewer who was writing both sort of said that she felt like, or they felt like this was an album that had, Choir Girl had accessible energy for like the straight male listener or something. There was something about it that there was something, because it had sort of a Radiohead-esque quality to it. Like it was maybe an album that could have like, you know, sort of jock listening to it as well as, you know, a witchy feminist. And I get what they're saying in that. And I think that if I pull back the inverse, is that Under the Pink sort of captured something in its sensuality and the emotional language of her voice, not just the lyrics, but the emotional like vocabulary of the way she was singing and the way she was sighing and the sort of intimacy of like something like Icicle, which was, you know, one of the first songs that I heard, that was saying something sort of, I don't know, that was not easily decipherable unless you were queer. There was something, which I'm sure was also true about female experience and femininity and female sexuality, but I felt sort of like overcome with like being wrapped up in something that she was doing vocally and tonally, that felt like she was also speaking to me and telling me that there was like going to be like another side to the sort of ennui and angst and fear that I was feeling as a young queer guy. Right, Matt?
I think that's a really good way to put it. And, you know, not to be too jokey about it, I think you're absolutely right. There is queerness to this album. I think it's really important. And I think in general in music at that time, I think queerness as a concept, especially like lesbian queerness, was much more prominent than male queerness at the time. So it was a little bit easier for women to talk about or present as queer in some way, especially in music.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think, Kristen?
I know
Straight
nothing
person.
about this topic.
What do you think, heterosexual?
Well, I'm racking my brain for something smart to say. For me, going back to the quiz to answer this question, is I definitely was and am a Boys for Pele person in the Holy Trinity.
Yeah. And
I think that I like things that make me feel weird and unsettled. And at the time I was a teenager, so very, very angsty. And I think like just that color palette of the blue and gray and all that just matched what I had in my head. Because, you know, the mental illness was popping. And it's like, I absolutely loved Under the Pink too. But I think I could connect with the surface level anger of Boys for Pele before I understood the explorations on like sexuality and deep like relationships in a way that is just a little bit deeper on Under the Pink. I don't think I was like there at that time. And I don't think it's something now that we're so far into the catalog and we kind of have our go-tos, I don't know that I think about that. Even when they chose to play Bells for Her on Yellow Jackets, it's like I love Tori Anywhere, but I was like, I don't know that I would have chosen that song. I absolutely understand why. I think it's great, but I was like, I don't know. But it's those relationships with those characters, it makes total sense. I think there's Matt, you've noticed this with me before where you've kind of like been like, there's something with me in intimacy, maybe. And so maybe there's a block there that I can't like connect with it. I don't know. It's weird.
I am your therapist. Yes. I don't know if it's intimacy. I think it's romance. Remember?
But I feel like despite all the heartache and Under the Pink though, the romance, it's like a heartbreaking intimacy. It's like how they go together, the dark side of romance almost, and not in an angry Boys for Pele way, which I think is very accessible to some of us who are crazy.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that the romance of Under the Pink is in the relationships that the protagonist or Tori has with her friends and her female friends in particular.
Yeah. And as I was going through the record, those moments of love or intimacy with men felt almost out of place, the songs, because the album is so firmly about woman to woman love and woman to woman violence and woman to woman betrayal. Even the more religious stuff has undercurrents of that. What's interesting, it's so funny to hear you guys talk about the romance of Under the Pink, because I think that it's not romantic to me. It's Boys for Pele is like a bleeding wound, but Under the Pink is like a beautiful purple bruise, and it's there's a lot of hurt there, and there's also this like knowing kind of smirk. I feel like smirks and sighs are the ways I would talk about Under the Pink. Like she knows she's going to be disappointed by the men. She's most alarmed and scared by the betrayals from the women, right? Like there's almost like an understanding, there's an anticipation of the hurt that comes from the men, but
isn't that like the belief in romance? Like that's the belief in romance, is that, or to get there you have to believe in romance first, right? No?
Oh, sure. No, sure. Like I think I get what you're saying. Like I feel like she's
hopeful, maybe?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like there can't be cynicism without optimism. There can't be skepticism without belief. There can't be love without hate. Like all these things are true. There has to be a chocolate song said, within the tension of the opposites. Even though we booted that, 2 out of 3 of us booted it off the record. That's
Justice for chocolate song. Justice for chocolate song.
Hashtag justice for chocolates.
But weirdly, when I say that, I'm like, that could sort of be like in another planet, like a B-side to Under the Pink. But
I could see that.
Yeah. I think there's so much hurt, but there's like there's a steely hurt that she was a grace to Under the Pink. It's one of the reasons why I love it so much, and think that production wise too, it is the most cohesive, and it sounds like it's all of one world in a way that the other albums don't quite achieve as well. I think maybe Scarlet's Walk gets that in a lot of ways, but it's different. Like that is a different type of structural cohesion that Under the Pink, part of it is John Philip Chanel, part of it I think, so this is where the romance comes in, because I think that the romance there is Eric and Tori in love, making this record as perfect as it can be. But obviously that relationship ended by the time that album even came out and she was touring it, I'm pretty sure. So or during the tour. So there was this maybe realization that this was the last thing they were going to make together. So maybe that's where that romance that you're feeling comes from. It comes from the actual like suturing and molding
Mm-hmm.
of this record. Because I just think it's so pitch perfect. I think there's not a bad song, and bad, that's a totally subjective word anyway, but there's no filler on this record. There's not a single song that I don't think really holds by itself and could be placed elsewhere. The strength of this track listing and the order, that's what makes it so tough, because I find that it's actually sequenced in the best possible way. So what I had to finally give myself over to was really truly messing with it in a way that felt uncomfortable. But I don't think there'll be another album where I feel more insecure about playing with the track listings, because I'm so attached to the way this is sequenced. Like, yeah, we'll talk more about it later when we get into it. But I feel
That's how I felt about
very
Scarlet's
unnerved
Wall.
about it.
I get it.
Yeah.
I was shook over Scarlet. I was texting the chain a lot.
I know. But you did it. You did a good job.
Joey, do you want to get us started and let us know where you first heard this record and maybe how the record first came to you?
Oh yeah, it's such a core memory in my mind. I was in my house. Nobody was home but me and my sister, and she was listening to Waitress from behind a closed door, and I was like, "What the fuck is this?" Like, I thought it was a whole song, or like I just didn't know what I was hearing, and I was again, I was 12. This was 94. And so the album was not, so it just been released pretty recently. And I knocked on her door. I was like, "What are you listening to? Like, what is this?" Being an obnoxious younger brother. And I made some sort of crack about how terrible it was, how it sounded like shit. Like I was being just a little asshole. And she said, no, come here, listen to this. And she made me come in, and she shut the door. She was like lying on like a pillow with like her legs up on her dresser, like in total like 90s teenage girl. You know what I mean? Like no TV in the room. Boombox, listening to a cassette of Under the Pink, and she
staring at the wall.
She made me sit down and listen to Icicle with her. And I was like, what? And I don't know what happened, but by the time Icicle ended, I was like, my life is different. I'm a changed human being. I need to hear all of this. And we listened to the whole record again. She had borrowed the cassette from her friend Christina, cassette of Under the Pink, and she had the cassette of Little Earthquakes. And I was like, whoa, what are these mushroom dicks? Like, I was, what is going on? Like opening the accordion, and was just so perplexed. Like, what am I even looking at? Is this like a Scotch tape roll? What is this picture? Like, I didn't even know what, like, there's something about Under the Pink that is so like, what are these images even? Like, where is she? Like, what are these shards? What is this light? What is this? Like, there's something so ghostly about it. Listen to it all. And then we listened to Little Earthquakes. And then we got our cousin Lauren into it, and then suddenly all three of us were listening to these albums kind of religiously and making mixes and sharing it, and that all led up to a year and a half later, we were in line day of to buy Under the Pink at the Borders in the mall. So it was just this incredible like build up, and just this like also this like weird thing of wanting to share it with everybody but also wanting to keep it a secret. Which I think people really, I don't know if people feel that way about music anymore, but it felt very true in the 90s. Like, you both wanted accolades for your favorite, but you also didn't want too many people to listen to your favorite. So I really distinctly remember that. And I think we eventually went and bought our own copies, but we probably had a dubbed, two track recording it for a while before we got our own cassettes, and then eventually got CDs. I don't think we got CDs of it until we got Boys for Pele, and then we went back and we bought. And I wish I'd kept my long boxes, because there were still long boxes then. But also in between that, you listen to Under the Pink, and then you discover, oh, there's this EP of covers with Smells Like Teen Spirit, and then you realize, oh, there are all these random singles of these other songs. Like, what is going on? Like, so that whole unfurling, like, there was so much to discover. And also, the last thing I'll say is, in between Under the Pink and Boys for Pele, we were down the shore a lot because our cousin Lauren's parents, Tony and Janet, owned a shore house, and there was a record shop that had imports, and there were all of these bootlegs of live performances from 92 and 94, and I couldn't afford any of them. They were so expensive. They were like $44 in 1994. It was
Oh my
crazy.
gosh.
And so I couldn't really afford any of them. I think that they knew, like her sister knew a guy, the guy who ran it. I think his name was Sam, and I think he maybe gave me a deal on like one, and I had to like choose what I was going to get. And there were videos too, and it was just such a moment. It was such a moment. They called them imports, but they were bootlegs, and it was just like my mind is exploding with all this content. And there were only 2 albums at the time, so imagine, right? So that memory, it's like months of memories compounded, but that was the initial. I'll never forget being in the house, the voice of Tori echoing, and me knocking on my sister's door. And if I hadn't, I wonder what things would be like if I hadn't knocked on the door to ask her what she was listening to.
I love that. Kristen, tell us, why don't you tell us also how young you are? Let's
Right. We can do round robin on ages if we need
There's
to.
no
Matthew.
age shame here. Come on.
Okay. So in 1994, I was 10 years old. So my first memory of Under the Pink was not when it came out. I discovered Tori in 96. And it's a bit condensed with my memory of Little Earthquakes because I had a friend whose sister loved Tori. She was older than us. Her older sister loved Tori, and she was listening to Little Earthquakes. We'll talk about this in the Little Earthquakes episode. And I was like, oh my God, I need this. I want this. And then I immediately went to Sam Goody, I believe it was, and bought everything that was out that I could get at the time. And so I was listening and learning Little Earthquakes at the same time as Under the Pink. And I just really, I think being so young at that, so 96, I was 12. So being so young, I think it was easier to connect with Little Earthquakes. Again, I think Under the Pink is just a little bit complex, at least for where I was. But yeah, and I remember eventually, something I very, very vividly remember listening to Pretty Good Year, and I'm like, oh, this is beautiful. And then you're like, ah! And then just being like, damn, this bitch is crazy. I love her, And just over time, that one taking longer for me to connect to, but really getting there and just being like, wow, I can't wait to see what comes next. And that was right when Boys for Pele came out as well. It was the same time. So, what about you, Matthew?
Well, at the time I was living in Michigan, in the Detroit area, and I had just started exploring like the gay scene. So all of my memories are again tied to queerness for this record, specifically because I was going to gay bars for the first time in my life. I was meeting gay people for the first time in my life. And it's really funny how I first heard this music. There was a drag queen at a bar in Detroit called the Gold Coast. I believe the Gold Coast still exists. It is in a really rough, really scary neighborhood, and the girls that go there to perform and hang out, they're not going to be on RuPaul's Drag Race. They're a little rough. This particular drag queen, I remember, I don't remember her name, but she performed Cornflake Girl.
Whoa.
She was obsessed with Tori, and
that's fun.
It was, it wasn't a very good performance. The wig was really dusty. It was really, it was, kind of cockeyed, but that was my first exposure. I'm not even making this shit up, but I was I was not entranced by the drag queen. I was more entranced by the song. And I mean, like, to be fair, that's a tough drag song. So
I can't imagine that performance at all.
So I sought out the record after that, and I had seen Tori before on MTV, and I kind of shrugged her off. I didn't really connect with what I was seeing. My first exposure to Tori in general was Little Earthquakes. the video for Silent All These Years. I saw it and I think I maybe gave it an eye roll, like this isn't for me. So it took this drag queen's performance to really bring me back into the fold. I think Tori would really appreciate that if I told her.
I think so.
I know she loves drag queens too, but that was my first exposure. And Michigan in 1994 was an innocent time.
Oh.
I love that. We should clarify. I'm sure you were going to those bars with a fake ID, right?
No. You could get in when you were 18 to any bar in Detroit, in the Detroit area.
Gosh.
You just couldn't.
I mean, they would serve you too. They didn't care.
Interesting.
And also, we were right across the river from Windsor, Ontario. Okay. So when you turned 19, you could, at that time, since I'm 100 years old, you didn't have to have a passport to get into Canada. So you drive across the Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge, and you would go to the gay bar there, which upstairs is called the Happy Tap. And upstairs was just trashy gay bar. And then downstairs was a fully nude male strip club.
Oh my God.
Shit.
So that's what I was doing when I was listening to Under the Pink. I was driving across the Ambassador Bridge. I couldn't go in there. I wouldn't go to the strip club. I was too freaked out by it. It scared me. But I would drive, across the Ambassador Bridge high and drunk, and that was no problem. But I couldn't make myself go into the naked strip club. I was such a prude. I was a prude. I couldn't help it. Oh, how things have changed.
Indeed. So speaking of change, I think it's time to mess with the master and share these track lists. I should have taken my inhaler puff before because I'm so stressed out. I'll be okay. I'll be okay.
I'm tempted to make Joseph go first since he's the one who's having like a meltdown.
Or make him wait it out. Make him sweat it out.
Okay, I know what we're doing. Matthew's going first because Matthew said this is the one he connected with the least, and so I'm so curious how he messed with the master.
Okay.
Yes, let's hear it.
Okay, so I wanted to just really get in there and fuck it up. I had no reverence for any of this because I don't have such a strong emotional connection to this record. I don't listen to it beginning to end.
We're going to clip that and we're going to at Tori and fuck you up.
I mean,
I'm kidding.
You can put it in the preview and I'll just send her a text. How about that?
Just text her. Yeah.
Wow. Here we go. We're talking about anyway.
Got it. Now we're throwing weight around. Now the balls are on the table. I get it. All right.
My balls are not quite on the table yet. It's a little early for that. So for Under the Pink, something I thought about a lot when I was putting the playlist together and when I was listening to the record, which obviously is an insanely good record, the sophomore curse, right? So there was a lot of expectation to live up to after Little Earthquakes. Rightfully so. Little Earthquakes was like, it's one of the great debut albums, I think, ever. And that's just me being objective about it. I think it's truly one of the best. So to follow that up, it's a really tricky balancing act, right? So it needed to expand on the mythology that she already created about herself and the worlds that she already created. And it still needed to be accessible enough musically to not alienate the people that she impressed with the first record, but it also needed to grow that audience. So it was a really tall order what she needed to do with Under the Pink. And I think we should really give a lot of credit to her for being so careful with the songwriting and the composition. I don't know that most artists would be able to show that kind of restraint. And I think there's a real amount of restraint and editing and purposefulness to Under the Pink, meticulousness. And I'm not saying that's not on the other records, but I think for this record in particular, it was really present. So one quote that I read, and this is something I went back and I looked at the Pop Matters Tori Amos Performer Spotlight that Joseph and I edited and put together.
Wrote a lot of. And
I'm going to put some of this in our social media, some links, but Tori said, on Little Earthquakes, you saw me naked, and with Under the Pink, I put some clothes on. So I thought that really encapsulated what she was going for perfectly. So with that being said, I start this record out with Bells for Her.
Oh, shit.
And my feeling was like, there's so many moments of audacious composition. Why not start it with I think this is a really challenging song in general. The sound of it, the prepared piano, the lyrics, which are, I think, Joseph, you brought up ghostliness. I feel like they are, it's like somebody speaking to you from the other side. So I wanted to start it with that. And I thought on Yellow Jackets, I thought it was perfectly placed. I thought it was a really impressive choice. I thought Cornflake Girl was more of the obvious choice for the show. So I was happy that they also used Bells for Her. So I also thought, through the portal, they can make amends. Can't stop what's coming, can't stop what is on the way, can't stop what's about to happen on this record. So from there, we go to Cornflake Girl, which is, I think, just such a good juxtaposition, right? And, we've all heard Cornflake Girl a lot in our lives. And probably for those of us who go to shows, we've heard it more times than we may care to hear it.
Wow.
I will say, listening to it to put together this record was fun. I don't always skip this song, even though I've heard it probably more than any other song. But
yeah,
I think it is the central thesis of this record. So I think it's important to have it up front. From Cornflake Girl, we go to The Waitress, which I like stylistically how it bumps. And now I'm never going to not think about Joey going to his sister's room and hearing the sounds of The Waitress as a 12-year-old. That's going to live rent-free in my head for the rest of my life.
Suburban New Jersey, young man.
That's right.
What is this?
All of a sudden, here's The Waitress, turns gay. From The Waitress...
Icicle turned me gay. Correction.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
I think Icicle may have turned you into a lesbian. From The Waitress, I go to Yes, Anastasia.
Wait,
I'm just that's an early placement.
It is, but I think you have to get through Anastasia early. I think it just needs to happen. I don't want to wait for it. I don't want to hold it for last. There was a version of this playlist that started with Yes, Anastasia.
Sure.
I thought about that too. I thought about it at the beginning too. Yep.
I think that would be a fun way to do it in an alternate universe, is like treating this album as the journey of Anastasia Romanoff, right?
Yeah, sure.
So from Anastasia, I go to Honey, which we all know belongs on this album. Honey is a good song.
The production is really amazing on it.
It's so good. And I like it after the austerity and the formality of Anastasia, that kind of like warm, sexual. I think it's a really sexy song.
It's a little dirty.
Also, notice how don't you find in listening to it again in this way that there's a conversation between Cornflake Girl and Honey that happens because the guitar work kind of mimics, right? That acoustic guitar work sort of mimics Cornflake Girl a little bit, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Something really interesting happening there with the sort of vibe that they're both going for.
I can see where you probably
didn't want that twice, right?
Yeah, where she may have agonized over making that cut because it's such a good song. But at the same time, I think she probably didn't want to repeat herself, but I think she did repeat herself a little bit. And I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Because I do cut some things from this playlist.
Here we go.
So after Honey, I go into Pretty Good Year. which I struggled with the placement for Pretty Good Year.
Sure.
Part of me wanted to have it at the end as the final song, but I thought that seems a little bit too much like a set list. So from Pretty Good Year, I went to Space Dog. From Space Dog to Cloud on My Tongue. After Cloud on My Tongue, I went ahead and added a non-album track. I added Take Me With You.
Oh, interesting.
Which
why?
Wow.
I know, it's wild. But I feel like the themes, the imagery.
Time out. That's the one she didn't finish in 94, right?
I think it's actually a Little Earthquake song, but we'll allow it.
No, it's fine. I just couldn't remember the timeline on where it fit.
Yeah.
I think it was between Little Earthquakes and Under the Pink. And
I think it was just music and not
you
no
know who will
vocals
know
done for
is
it.
Yes Said. I'm going to go to Yes Said. Continue to talk while I look it up. I just need to know.
Sure. So Take Me With You, I thought because of the guitars and sort of the elements of eroticism, I really thought it belonged on this record. And I needed a little bit more of I needed a little bit more atmosphere at this point in the record. And I think for me it started to veer more into a collection of songs that were mostly piano with a little bit of orchestration. And I didn't think sonically that was super interesting to listen to in a playlist. So
you're less interested in solo songs in general, I find, right? Like you're a little bit more interested in some percussion or some innovation of sound a little bit.
I mean,
is that fair?
Yes and no. I think on an album or on a playlist, too many of those similar sounding songs for me, I lose interest a little bit. So I need a little bit more variation or a little bit of something. So after, sorry, hang on 1 second, my phone. Okay, so after Take Me With You, I go into Icicle. And from Icicle, we go into and from Icicle, we go into Past the Mission. Past the Mission into Sister Janet.
Love that.
Oh, say more there. Say more about Sister, because the Mission and the sister, of course. Right. I'm curious. curious about how this B-side made the album. Say a little more.
Sure. So let me tell you what my final song is, and then it may make more sense. So my final song is God. And
interesting.
Icicle, Past the Mission, Sister Janet, God. Those four, to me, belong together.
I like that.
They have elements of religion, imagery of the church, and they're all different enough to exist together in that space. I added Sister Janet because there wasn't a true solo piano moment on the record without it. I love the song. I think it's one of the B-sides that I've most responded to. I remember when I first heard it, I immediately was like, wow, I love this song. I can't believe it. So I got rid of 2 songs. I got rid of The Wrong Band, which I've never really done anything other than skip. It's not my favorite song. But whatever. So for me, the playlist was fine without it. And I then also removed Baker Baker, which I felt like I was getting the same essence, the same vibe from Cloud on My Tongue. It has the same feeling. I didn't need more piano orchestration for me, for my listen. That's it.
Fascinating.
That is fascinating.
But I'm happy with the way it all worked out. And listening to it, Cloud on My Tongue really stands out for me. It's a song that I can listen to all the time, live, on the record, even on Gold Dust. I like it. So that was a pure joy for me.
Okay.
To just listen over and over. Kristen, tell us about your playlist and what's happening.
So our listeners definitely need to go and listen to Matt's playlist first before we go into my playlist. I'll let you pause. Go ahead and pause. And now I'm going to do my playlist.
Listen to a full album and then
listen
come
to
back.
a full album, come
again.
back.
Yeah,
right. We'll see you in an hour and then so mine's very different, and I definitely pulled some stunts, some tricks, you know I do. Mm-hmm. So we start with Yes, Anastasia, because I know. Okay, so a few things. I know it's so stunty. It's so stunty. I can see Matthew's face. So a few reasons. Like, I love the connections between the albums. And I took a very literary approach with this, where I really dove into Yes Said, and I read a lot of excerpts from interviews and kind of Tori's thoughts on, because there's so much documentation around this time of her interviewing and talking about the songs. And so I went full literary, and I didn't remember this, but Poppy in the song is from Silent All These Years. I didn't remember that. She's the girl in Silent All These Years. And I was like, I love that connection, that bridge between the last world, Little Earthquakes, and the new world, Under the Pink. I also love one thing she said about this song, or at least in relation to this song. She said, you can't blame men anymore. And since there's so much loss and so much conflict between men and women and women in this, I thought that was a really nice way to start this album, because it gets really deep on what happens after the blame and the dissolving of these relationships, and really looking at them in that Under the Pink type of way. Let's move on. So since I went very literary, I kind of almost took the theme, like the gardens beekeeper theme. So our next kind of garden we're moving into, although it's a desert garden because we're in Taos. This one I call Cliques and Places That We Don't Belong. So this is God with the main theme of how the church treats women, and then Wrong Ban, which is how men treat women. Especially men empowered treat women. Yes. Cornflake Girl, and then Waitress, which is women treating women badly in various various states. So it was interesting to pair those four together. They sound weird together on a playlist, but I was like, hey, again, since I listened to this straight through, we're messing with it. We're just going purely literary theme. And I realized just how much about this album is about how shitty people treat people. I don't remember that, right? Yeah. Okay. So after all that hatred and misogyny and just general bad vibage, our sexual energy has been built up, right? And we are going to Icicle because we need to rub it out. I mean, what else do you do, right? You got to release the tension. The tension. I know. Also, Waitress to Icicle, like that abruptness is just very jarring in that Tori way that I love. So I actually love the way those flow together. Then after Icicle, Honey, because it's a dirty little song. But also, since I went literary and I was reading the interviews, Tori said in 2015, she said, Honey is the glue of Under the Pink. So I put it right in the middle. And I really like that idea of sticking that glue in the middle where maybe she wished she would have. I almost thought about leaving it as a... Go ahead.
That sounds very provocative.
Oh, does it?
Well, that image of Tori covered in honey naked.
I love it.
She's telling us,
That's true. She's
telling us.
So that song's so dirty. I thought about just leaving it as a B-side because I really think it can stand on its own. I can't actually imagine it on the album. But again, we went literary. So I was like, it's the literal and metaphorical glue. So we're going. After Honey, we go to Peeping Tommy. I know.
I love that.
Guys,
I didn't even think about that.
I know, but Matthew's always making fun of me for my love of Peeping Tommy, but I think it is the most vulnerable she's been. Like, if a handful of her songs, vulnerability, I think it's that voyeurism, looking at the most intimate parts of somebody, like looking from the outside. And just like knowing that you're not all there, you're not all ready, this disassociation thing. With this person you love, that romance, that person you love, and there's something not there. And then we just go into hardcore loss. After Peeping Tommy, we go Black Swan, Baker Baker. She's losing this man. He's gone. The loss theme continues with Bells for Her. Hi, my husband just walked in while I'm recording our podcast. Bells for Her, loss. Cloud on My Tongue, like loss. You know, like this just, am I alone in this world? Am I alone in this? And then Past the Mission. She once knew a hot girl. That's herself. And after all of this loss, heartache, you once knew her, but there's a bit of hopefulness there too, that maybe you can find her again, and the acknowledgement of she was whole at some point, or she was, you know, feeling herself at some point. So that line is so devastating, but there's a hopefulness to that album, or that song, sorry. And then we go to Space Dog. I just needed like a fun little jaunt after all that like soul destruction. I just needed to like pop it up, you know? And then we go to Pretty Good Year. I closed it with Pretty Good Year, which I think is an easy thing to do. Like, it's totally easy. And I think because she's been doing that live sometimes, there's that association. I do love it as an opener more. But so one thing I wrote in my notes, and I wanted to hit on this and why I put it last, is in this story, despite all of the loss and heartache, there's an acknowledgement of it being a pretty good year. Maybe also a little bit of smirkiness. Maybe she doesn't really believe it. Maybe it's, somebody mentioned the smirkiness and the sighs, the smirks, all that happening behind the scenes. Maybe it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but maybe there's like hope there too, that you grew, you saw, you know, there was something to take out of it. And so that's how I ended it. And I ended up fucking loving my playlist. I didn't think I was going to. I love it.
Good job. That is a really good playlist. I'm curious about the inclusion of Black Swan. I thought about it a lot. There's something about it that feels so unstructured to me, that it doesn't feel like it would possibly, like, the way that Matt was describing the carefulness of Under the Pink, like Black Swan feels anything but. So it feels so distinctly, but it's such a special song. It's so beautiful. The melody is so amazing. I get why you did it, but I couldn't find a way to add it because of that sort of like languid improvisational feeling that it has. Didn't feel like it sort of had a place on the record, but I'm glad that you did it, because I'm glad somebody did it.
I think it's a real B-side. Like, I think it's a true B-side. But that Peeping Tommy, there's like a little bit of like a languid kind of vibe of Peeping Tommy too. And if you put Peeping Tommy, Black Swan, and Baker Baker, it is just like a trinity of loss. So, but yeah, agree. That song is a B-side to me forever and always.
Sure.
So.
Do you remember when we heard, I think it was definitely the first time I ever heard Black Swan, we were at that Camden show in 2002 where we sat next to Tori's parents, and Tori did Black Swan with the band, and she looked over at her mother and said, "Ride on, mama." Remember that?
We were sitting right in front of them.
Right next to her, and she was all teary-eyed, and Tori was looking at her and said, "Ride on, mama." And that was also the night that her father was just telling us in great detail about how much money Professional Widow made them. Remember? He was like, how
he told us his favorite song was Floating City.
Yes.
I'll never forget that.
Floating City was his favorite song. We had such an amazing conversation with them. It was so...
He also told me to save my soul because no one else will. And like, that's kind of my Roman Empire. Sometimes I'll just be like cleaning out my closet, like doing stuff. And I'm like, what did he mean?
Mr. Ed, yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean?
You bring up something interesting in that I think we've all had some really great live moments with these songs. These songs have had a lot of reinventions live. These songs have had a lot of different arrangements. The one that keeps coming back to my mind is this past tour when we were in New York at the first night of the New York shows, and she pulled out of thin air Waitress, but
to close
the way
show.
she to close the show, the way she used to do it in '98.
All that.
And we all, every single person that was in that place was just like, oh my fucking God. And then of course, like the greatest part of that was we got to tell her in Boston when we got to go back and see her how much she just rocked our faces off, and she loved it. And then she kept playing it. So it was really, really great to hear Waitress on this last tour because she really went for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Unexpected. And I think probably tapped into something so different from, 30 years ago, and so different from, 20 years ago or whenever she was playing it on the Plug tour 20 something years ago. Okay.
And it was no big deal. She was just like, oh, you guys liked it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We fucking liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. But that just shows like the difference between like what we think of artists and their relationship to what they're doing, whether like as an actor or a musician. Like we can never, as much as we think we know the woman we call Tori and what makes her tick. And in some ways we do on personal levels, Matthew more than us, obviously, because he has this working relationship with her, but it doesn't matter how much you study or observe or watch the patterns over the years. You can never know what's really inside the mind, the intention, and the that connection or lack of connection. Like I always think of Madonna. This feels like a very unrelated thing. A Madonna or like a Liz Phair, who are very different musicians, but two musicians who very publicly like kind of say that they don't have deep connections to their songs. Like they don't like or care about most of their music, and they're very upfront about that. Like it's just something recorded in time. That's they don't play most of their songs live, right? Like it's a very interesting thing that I think is probably true for a lot of musicians. It's not true for Tori by and large, but I think that we also at our own peril misunderstand her relationships because they're different than ours. And I think she wants us to have our own relationships to her songs. I don't think she wants us to rely on what she feels or thinks about her music, right? Okay. Sorry, Matt.
Oh,
you want to say something before we list?
I'm ready. Bring it. Let's hear this playlist. I'm ready.
So unsurprisingly, in some ways, it's sort of a fusion between the intention that you each had. I sort of grouped it into different categories that somehow worked sonically really, really well in terms of dynamics. So and it pains me to change the opener, but I challenge myself because I love Pretty Good Year so much. But in this version, I also want to say that I thought about how would Tori sequence this album now? How would the Tori of 2024 sequence this record? And that really was a guiding force for me. I want to tell you in advance, I cut nothing. I just added. So it's a longer record. So it begins with Cloud on My Tongue, which for me is the thesis of Under the Pink. And I think no song on the record embodies the mood, the voice, the sound, the feeling, the color, the texture of the album more than Cloud on My Tongue. Cloud on My Tongue is an all-encompassing representation of Under the Pink to me. When I look at the cover of the album, that's Cloud on My Tongue, right? Like the artwork is Cloud on My Tongue.
And it also speaks to the queerness of the record again. I did a little deep dive into it because I wanted to know more about the imagery of violets. And in the early part of the 20th century, lesbians in Paris who studied and celebrated the works of Sappho wore violets on their clothes.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. And that sort of double entendre of the if I ate her, if I hate her, the Borneo, the cannibalism, and they could have done something really, maybe they still could do something a little bit creepy with those lyrics on Yellow Jackets for a future cannibalism scene. So we go from Cloud on My Tongue to Waitress. That transition from the end of Cloud on My Tongue to those drums, it's really something. And from Waitress, we go to Cornflake Girl. So I placed it early as well.
Like it.
And after Cornflake Girl comes Bells for Her. So I have this sort of suite of those songs that are about that feminine betrayal that is so prominent. So for me, that sort of like anchors the beginning of the record. And Bells for Her, the ending of, and I see it, excuse me, I see it coming and it's on its way, leads into Space Dog, because Space
Ooh.
Dog is this like jettisoning of us to the future. We're going forward with it, but she is still mired. That ending of Space Dog, in some ways, to me, really mirrors the ending of Cloud on My Tongue. There's that circuity of it that I think is really interesting. So we have almost what happens in the beginning, not quite midpoint of the record, but in the beginning of this new section of the record. That I think is really, really important. And there's also that sort of Space Dog, I think she's even said like Space Dog, the heavens, like the big guy upstairs, like she makes the connection between Space Dog and something heavenly, something otherworldly, something celestial. And so we go from Space Dog into Icicle, because I think that from Space Dog she gets that permission to almost go back in time to childhood and that relationship to religion, because Icicle is about sort of embodying and wrapping yourself in spirituality and sensuality, but then also pushing it back out and rejecting it. The good book is missing some pages. I'll take from my body instead. It's a really pivotal moment of rejecting something. And that empowerment carries us over to Past the Mission, which has that smirk. It is like she like is stuck in this Magdalene story. And it's so it's like painful and joyful, but almost in like an I told you so kind of way. There's something a little bit like jokey about Past the Mission, and having Trent Reznor on it feels just so it's so of the moment. It's so iconic to have him singing, and almost not realizing that she's almost making fun of him and his sort of like there's something that she's doing that's prodding and playing with him, and he is so serious and quiet in it that it's I don't know, it sort of embodies a lot of the intention and the mood of that song for me to have him on it. And so from Past the Mission we go to God, because you have to go to God, because God is, this ultimate snark. Do you need a woman to look after you? Like, how blasphemous can you get? But it's also sexy and fun, and you have those crazy raging guitars that are so, as many people listening know, but those who maybe don't, they had to make 3 versions of God to send to radio, because the guitars were so abrasive and so unsettling that they were like, nobody's going to play this. You have a song called God. It is already going against the patriarchy, and it has these like, screeching, so these like screeching, abrasive, accosting guitars. And it's such an interesting moment of the production matching the message of the song in a really interesting way. So we get through that sort of block of the vulgar and the spiritual, the profane, and the virgin. And from there we move into the suite of songs that are about these romantic relationships, and we go to Pretty Good Year, where I think that she is sort of observing this male energy dwindling and having empathy or sympathies for it. But as she has said, there was one bootleg where she says no pity right before she sings this, like she feels for Greg but no pity, because she's not, so there's kind of this like waiting around for this guy, this baby to be all right, and he's not all right. It doesn't work because he's not found himself in the way that she's found herself. So in the waiting then comes the next stage of the of grief, where she is both angry and rationalizing and trying to reason, and that comes in the form of Honey. So we get Honey after Pretty Good Year. And for me, after Honey gives that kind of release, Baker Baker comes, where there is a wistful, nostalgic, he's gone, he's far away, but she's thinking about him and she still wonders if he's okay. But if you see him, say hi, because she's not going to go there again. But You know, you want that.
So sad.
Yeah, she wants that sort of intermediary to send the message along, but she can't do it herself. And that's another thing about, you know, the voice and the ways in which messages come from us directly or have to be sort of sent through other mediums to get to people. That's certainly true in the tension between her and the women on the record and the betrayal that they experience, that she experiences by them, but also that bells for her, like you can't get that message across to her. There's nothing I can do, right? And Space Dog is all about miscommunication and how we transport messages to each other. So after Baker Baker, we take a really interesting swing and we go to the Wrong Band, because I feel like I am such a staunch lover of the Wrong Band. I think it is so.
I know you
Even
love
by
it.
Tori herself, I don't understand that she doesn't see, or others don't see. There's that playfulness. To me, it does what Happy Phantom does not do. It gives us a sort of that musical theater kind of, burst, but the content, what it's about, I mean, the fact that it's about her playing, playing in those hotels in DC and befriending a prostitute who learns something that she's not supposed to. It's just this like really this really unique and quirky version of a lot of the themes on the record coming to fruition in this really playful way. But I love that ending, just that, she says, "It's time I open my eyes. Don't be afraid to open your eyes. Maybe she's right. Maybe she's right." That clarity, I think, is so needed, and it's said so so simply in such a forthright way that I think to lose it, for me, like I couldn't lose it. I think it says something really profound. And we take another detour from there into Yes, Anastasia. That clarity then allows her to go on this journey. But I don't end with Yes, Anastasia, which I love, and which features my favorite subtle moment on the whole record. We'll get to it at the very end. But I put Yes, Anastasia there, but we don't end there. We actually end on Sister Janet. So after Yes, Anastasia, we end on Sister Janet for many reasons. But for me, listen to how it begins. Master Shaman, I have come. It is preparation for the journey of Boys for Pele, of going on that journey with a shaman in order to access that darkness in her. So she is calling on not only Sister Janet, but the representation of Sister Janet and the wizards. And it is preparing us for a darkness, a spirituality, a trip of the mind and of the body and of the soul that we get on Boys for Pele. And I feel like to have this like shorter solo moment, and she says, "I think I can try this once again." And it goes to that circular nature of Under the Pink. And I just love Sister Janet so much. It feels like more than a B-side to me. But I just think that, the wing can cover all sorts of things. There is that wing in the artwork too. Like it feels so much like part of the fabric of the record that I see why she didn't include it and kept it as a B-side. But much like Honey, I think that in retrospect, after all these years, it does have a placement on the record proper. And for me, I think that it is the perfect closer that looks back and looks forward, given what comes next.
You also asked her to play it, and I'm sure that it's in your heart, as Alice would say.
Sure,
you're in my heart.
It did. That's yes. I mean, and that's very sweet. But yes, I did ask her to play it. My beloved Aunt Janet was leaving us. She was leaving the earth, and she died shortly after. And I'd been asking Tori for it, and she said no. She said she didn't think she could. She didn't think she could do it.
She said, "I have a lot.
I have a lot coming," and I have other reasons to think why she wouldn't want to engage with loss in that way, and maybe was not. But for whatever reason, she did it.
Amazing.
And she surprised us, and she did this incredible improv in the beginning of it. And did it influence me? Sure, but I also don't think that what she did with it in concert matches what I think it does as the closer on the album. So I have a very, very, very special place in my heart for it. But there's the the shading is different in looking at it on the record versus looking at it in that special moment last summer.
Beautiful.
And yeah, that's my Under the Pink. Shall we just say really quickly our favorite? Can we narrow it down to one favorite moment on this record
I
before we
can.
close? Yeah, Maddie, what is it?
Yeah, it's the piano bridge of Cornplate Girl. There's nothing better than that piano. It's complicated. It's wild. It is going to take you on a journey in a fast car. I think we mentioned earlier that we've all seen this song played, performed a lot, and that bridge never gets old. Watching Tori's hands go up and down the piano during that bridge, watching the joy it brings her to perform that song, knowing what an accomplishment that bridge is musically, and watching her play it, it just brings me a lot of joy. And it's just a beautiful piece of music. That's my moment. Hands down, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you see her, we've seen her do it so many times that sometimes you see her looking at her hands or not, and you can almost watch her almost in disbelief that her hands are doing it. You know what I mean? There's something about it that I think is so, she knows how impressive it is. And sometimes you see her full bodied into it. And sometimes you see her pretty like erect, stiff, like just kind of getting through it. And yet the muscle memory of it, that right, there's something that I'm sure she's amazed all the time that she did it, and that she does it, you know.
I think she feels very satisfied and very justifiably proud of herself for that piece of music. It's recognizable. It is maybe the signature song of her career. Absolutely. And you know, it's not an easy thing to play. It's really, really hard. So,
and to imagine a time when that could be on the radio too, it's such a moment that we'll never get back, to have musicianship like that showcased. It almost feels like a very direct fuck you to the record company that wanted to take off the pianos on Little Earthquakes, to have this prominent single be like, listen to all this piano, motherfuckers, listen to all of it. It's not only a lot of piano, but it's the best of, like, it's like the best composition that you will ever hear in a pop song. Like, it's just it's so good.
Yeah. Which is why it's great that Yellow Jackets sort of brought it back into prominence. And you know, that moment in Yellow Jackets did really it got a lot of attention.
And also on Beef on Netflix also had it featured, which was very surprising. It's having a lot of, I think that company that she that is taking care of the publishing now, I think is doing some smart things with getting her songs placed.
And I will say for Yellow Jackets, I want to, in my fantasy investigation of why Tori became a two-time includee on Yellow Jackets. I know Melanie Linsky is a really big Tori Amos fan.
Is she?
Yeah. So I think Melanie probably said, "Hey, let's put a little more Tori into this." So
Melanie, please add us. Let us know. Confirm. Tell us what shows you were at.
Yes, we need to get her on the podcast. I think she would.
I think Melanie would do it. She's a friend. I could ask her.
You know, Heavenly Creatures is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time, so I'd be happy to tell her about that over and over and over and over. Kristen, what is your moment?
The climax of Icicle. Could have, should have. I didn't. It's just I didn't. It's beautiful, heartbreaking. It feels like it sounds like a climax, and then like the retraction, you know. Sorry, it's a gross word.
No, well, you got it. You got as gross as you could. Thank you. Thank you, Tori. I also would say mine is probably from Icicle, though I'm probably going to cheat and give you one extra little moment that I think you'll all agree with. But for me, it's the quiet and then the getting off while they're all downstairs. They're the way, like, you feel like there's no way to not get to not talk about a song about
I know.
masturbation, but you feel like the lift of the body when she does that. You feel her body, you feel her, and it's so, for the same reasons that you described in the climax. But I think that getting off is such a perfect pairing of music and voice and lyric together, moving together in sync, in perfect sync, like a great climax, right? Does. Like, there's no way around it. She's embodying that feeling in the song, which is why this is such a special record, because she embodies so many feelings in little moments like that. Matt's dying to say something. What, Matt?
I'm just so embarrassed that we're ending this episode talking about getting off. I'm really sorry to
we're not
our
the
listeners.
We're not the one who recorded it.
We cannot put this on our LinkedIn, guys. This is YouTube only.
I'm a little surprised. I'm a little surprised that you both chose moments from Icicle. That's what's great about this podcast. We learn new things about our friends all the time.
Yeah. We're filthy.
I would have never gone there.
Really? The way she, like, the way you can feel her movement, and she makes your body move similar to that moment in Cloud on My Tongue live every time where you want to dip and you see her dip. It gives me chills to think about.
Me too.
No other musician does that. And
nobody.
Those...
there's one other really small moment that was a runner-up for me, if we're going to give a runner-up moment, and that is the dueling choruses at the end of Space Dog.
Yeah,
that's when I was like, oh, that's what a background vocal can do. It can be a co-leading vocal. I love when she rearranges that song and plays the chorus at the beginning of the song. That's a very special, the lyrics and the timing, it's just very special.
My little runner-up moment that I wonder if you all love as much as I do. I was listening to Yes, Anastasia again in the car yesterday when I was working on my list. I wasn't working on this while I was driving. I was just listening to that iteration of it. Don't worry. And I am obsessed with, and I always have been, but it really, something about maybe my sound system or just the way it filled the car in that moment, that really, really distant, towards the end where she says, all the girls seem to be there, that space and that the there, it comes from far away and like runs up to the microphone. It feels like she's running, screaming it, saying it. The there is faint, and then it gets all the way up into the mix. It's such a small moment. I get chills just thinking about it now. But what a careful, like, it's just such a what a thing to like say. And you know that she insisted on that. You know, she was like, that has to come from the back and run up. Like, but it's part of a lyric. It's part of a phrase. It's not like what a strange thing was her head back far from the mic? Did she do that?
Bet.
Like, what was the, you know what I mean? Like, it's so, but she kept it that way. She didn't fix it. It's like that on purpose. It's such a small thing, and I love it. I think it's so brilliant. I love it.
I don't know if I have a runner-up. I really don't. You
don't have to.
I'm not going to. I just love it.
If it's something about jerking off, we don't need to hear it.
It's absolutely not about jerking off.
Then you'll never hear it, Matt.
I will say the last thing I'll say before we close, because I know we got to close, I had eaten a gummy when I was doing my reordering, and I was really struggling with getting the right songs and all of it, and it kept putting me in Yes, Anastasia. It kept I must have added it like 4 times to the playlist accidentally or something. And I was a little, so I was like a little bit disassociated, kind of listening, kind of doing a few different things. And I kept being like, this song is fucking good. And it's like, it takes you through each moment where it feels like a different song. And so I think my backup / appreciation is just how epic that song is. It's a work of art. It is also work to listen to. And I mean that in the best way. Like, she's making you work. And I love it.
Well, on that, I think it's a perfect note to end on. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can please find us on YouTube at Messing with the Master Podcast, on Instagram at Messing with the Master. Share your own personalized track lists. Tell us whose you love and whose you hate. Well, no. You don't say who's you
No.
hate, but who you like less. But
If
tell
you
us
hate
what-
it, you hate it. That's fine too.
I
That's
guess.
We're not here to
I'm
tell
a-
you how to
I'm
listen.
a little too sensitive for that. I don't want hate mail.
Mhm.
But yeah, just join us next week. This has been so much fun. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for indulging this wild concept that we have. But we love it. It's such an occasion to be together, to talk about our favorite person and music, and to do it together, and for you all to watch and listen is a real privilege. So thank you all. And
Thank
5
you.
stars, subscribe, rate, tell friends.
Bye.
Let's get those numbers up. Okay.
Only 5
Thanks.
stars.
Only 5 stars.
Thanks for following.
Thank you,
Thanks for all
everybody.
the interaction.
Bye.
Bye.
Getting up while they're all downstairs singing prayers, sing away. He's in my pumpkin PJs. Lay your book on my chest. Feel the word, feel the word, feel the word, feel the word, feel the